What happens when a family ignores the warnings of the one person who sees trouble coming? Margaret watched her loved ones dismiss every red flag, until the IRS came knocking, and what followed left the entire town in shock. Margaret Rowan had watched over the Rowan family business for nearly 4 decades. What started as a single small-town hardware store had grown under her stewardship into a bustling local chain, with 3 storefronts, a warehouse, and a tidy fleet of delivery vans. She'd worked long hours, sometimes 7 days a week, learning the business from her father, then running it herself after he passed. Over the years, she'd become the heart and mind of the Rowan legacy, known for her sharp eye, honest dealings, and unwavering commitment to her employees. But now, Margaret felt like a stranger in her own office. The business had officially passed into the hands of her children, Alan and Lisa, 3 years ago. Margaret had stepped back, at least on paper. Alan, always ambitious but careless, was CEO. Lisa, the younger sibling, had a knack for marketing but little patience for numbers. Margaret had remained as advisor, a role that mostly involved being ignored in meetings and dismissed as old-fashioned when she raised concerns. It had started with the small things: receipts missing from the monthly reports, strange charges on the company card, invoices marked paid but never reconciled with the bank statements. Margaret kept a careful ledger, as she always had, jotting down inconsistencies and discrepancies in a worn notebook. She brought these to Alan and Lisa at the quarterly meeting, her voice gentle but insistent. "Alan, there's a difference of nearly $5,000 between inventory received and sales recorded. And Lisa, these advertising expenses, you've signed off on bills from firms I've never heard of. Shouldn't we look into it?" Alan waved her off. "Mom, the business has changed. Everything's digital now. There's always a lag on the books. Besides, the accountants look at everything at year-end." Lisa rolled her eyes. "You worry too much. This isn't the 1980s. We have software that tracks all of this." Margaret pressed her lips together, suppressing her frustration. She'd seen enough to know when things weren't adding up. She quietly doubled down on her vigilance, calling vendors herself, checking with trusted longtime staff, even digging through boxes of old receipts after hours. The employees, those who'd been there since her father's days, confided in her. Inventory was going missing from the warehouse, they whispered. New hires were coming and going so fast no one knew who was responsible for what. "Alan's friends are handling deliveries now," one clerk muttered. "We never see the paperwork." Margaret approached Alan again, this time more direct. "If you don't get a handle on this, you'll have bigger problems than missing wrenches. We could get audited, or worse." Alan bristled. "You're retired, Mom. Let us run the business. If you don't like it, don't read the books." Lisa dismissed her concerns entirely. "Maybe you need a vacation. Take a cruise. Let go for once." But Margaret could not let go. Not with the family name, and the livelihoods of so many, at stake. That night, she stayed late in the office, copying records onto a flash drive, updating her ledger with every strange payment and unexplained deduction. She emailed the family accountant, an old friend of her late husband, asking for an off-the-record meeting. Days turned into weeks. Alan's temper grew shorter. Lisa became more evasive. Margaret noticed a strange tension in the office, employees whispering behind closed doors, managers avoiding her gaze, and a new air of uncertainty that left her anxious. When she tried to speak at the next board meeting, Alan cut her off. "Enough, Mom. You're making problems where there aren't any. Trust us for once." Margaret sat back, silent but unconvinced. As she left, the receptionist slipped her a note. "Warehouse staff worried. IRS called asking about delivery logs. Alan told them you'd call back." Her heart pounded. Margaret knew, in that moment, that something was very wrong. She had tried to warn her family. They hadn't listened. But now, the outside world was asking questions. That evening, Margaret locked herself in her office and began assembling every piece of evidence she had: her ledger, the flash drive, the employee notes, and her correspondence with the accountant. She had done everything in her power to protect her family's legacy. But she knew, deep down, that what came next would be out of her hands. For the first time in 40 years, Margaret feared for more than just the business. She feared for the future of everything she'd built. Margaret spent the next few days in a restless haze, haunted by the receptionist's note and the words, "IRS called." Her every instinct screamed that the time for gentle warnings was over. She met quietly with old accountant Harold Bishop, a loyal friend since her father's days, in a booth at the back of Gertie's diner. Harold listened, eyes narrowed, as Margaret slid him copies of financial records, vendor notes, and her own careful ledger. "Something's off, Harold. Alan and Lisa won't listen, but the numbers, they don't lie." He flipped through the papers, frowning deeper with every page. "This isn't just sloppy bookkeeping. This is exposure, Margaret. Payroll taxes haven't been matching W-2 reports. There are ghost vendors getting regular payments. And those inventory write-offs, looks like someone skimming." Margaret's face fell. Could it be the new managers Alan hired? Or, she stopped, unable to finish the thought, her own children? Harold shook his head. "Don't jump to conclusions yet. But if the IRS called, they've seen enough to warrant a look. If there's fraud, they won't stop until they find it." That night, Margaret's worries deepened. She replayed every conversation with Alan and Lisa, searching for clues she'd missed. Had Alan's recent business trips been to cover his tracks? Why did Lisa avoid the office now, working remotely and rarely showing up in person? The air at home was heavy with unspoken tension. Even family dinners were awkward, Alan and Lisa checking phones under the table, snapping at each other when talk turned to business. At the store, the employees sensed trouble. Inventory managers muttered about missing boxes and incomplete deliveries. Longtime cashier Mrs. Doyle confided, "It's not like it used to be, Mrs. Rowan. People come and go. Some of the new hires don't even clock in properly. I saw Alan's friend Dave walk out with a stack of boxes last Thursday. Said Alan approved it." Margaret's sense of dread only grew. She quietly began making backup copies of digital records, storing them at home. She started a second notebook, this one strictly for meetings with Alan and Lisa, recording their answers and attitudes verbatim. Then the first IRS letter arrived. It was addressed to Rowan Hardware, attention, bookkeeping. Inside, a terse notice, discrepancies in payroll taxes, a request for documentation on certain vendors, and a demand for shipping records from the warehouse. Margaret's hands shook as she read. She called Alan immediately. He brushed her off. "It's just routine. Happens all the time. IRS gets a tip, they check, we answer, it goes away." Margaret pressed, "Have you kept every record they want? Do you know where the delivery logs are? And who's been signing off on these new vendor payments?" Alan lost his temper. "Why do you care? You're not in charge anymore. Just let us handle it. You're making this worse." The next morning, Lisa called Margaret in a panic. "Did you see the IRS letter? Alan says you're overreacting, but I don't know, Mom. I can't find half the vendor contracts. And the warehouse guys are asking if we're being audited. What do I tell them?" Margaret sighed, her resolve hardening. "You tell them the truth, Lisa. And you both come to my house tonight. We need to go through every record, every transaction, together. No more hiding." That evening, the three Rowans sat at Margaret's dining room table, surrounded by boxes of files and stacks of printouts. Lisa grew pale as Margaret and Harold pointed out the mismatched numbers, the ghost vendors, the money slipping out the back door. Alan grew angrier, defensive, accusing everyone of ganging up on him. But as the night wore on and the facts became undeniable, the gravity of their situation sank in. They were facing more than just a routine audit. They were staring down the barrel of a full-blown investigation. When they finally parted, Alan slammed the door behind him, refusing to say goodnight. Lisa lingered, tears in her eyes. "Why didn't we listen to you, Mom?" Margaret embraced her daughter, exhausted but steady. "It's not too late, Lisa. But now we have to act, together and fast." As midnight struck, Margaret realized the foundation of the Rowan business, and her own family, was beginning to crack under the weight of their choices. The IRS had come knocking, and what happened next would test everything she believed about loyalty, legacy, and the true meaning of family. The next morning, Margaret woke to a heavy silence in her house. She had barely slept, mind racing with worries and possibilities. Her phone buzzed before sunrise. Harold, the accountant, checking in. "Margaret, if you want any chance to get ahead of this, we need to lay all our cards on the table. No more secrets. The IRS wants transparency, fast. Margaret nodded, steeling herself for the hardest day yet. She called Lisa, who arrived still in pajamas, clutching coffee and her laptop. Alan was another matter. He didn't answer at first, and when he did, his voice was hoarse and resentful. "I'll come by after lunch. Don't start without me." While waiting, Margaret and Lisa dove into the records. Lisa, faced with the mess she'd helped ignore, worked with a new urgency. She cross-checked invoices, digital banking records, and payroll reports, highlighting anything odd. They found vendor payments with no physical address, checks written to names neither recognized, and a credit card statement full of luxury restaurant charges billed as client meetings. More than once, Lisa gasped, "I thought Alan took care of that. I never checked." Margaret was relentless, every entry a thread she tugged. She compared years of tax returns, flagged handwritten notes in the ledgers, and called long-time suppliers for clarification. Some vendors, it turned out, hadn't received payments in months. Others denied any recent business with Rowan Hardware at all. By midday, Alan finally stormed in, agitated and defensive. He tossed his jacket on a chair and glared at the piles of files. "Are you two still at it? You'll just make it look worse if you start changing things now." Margaret's response was icy calm. "We're not changing anything. We're documenting what's real. The IRS has already found problems. If we try to hide or cover up, it'll be the end for all of us." Alan folded his arms, muttering about overreaction and bad luck. But when Harold joined them, arriving with his own printouts and a look of grim determination, Alan had no choice but to listen. All afternoon, the four of them sat together, reviewing every detail. Harold explained the audit triggers, the tax mismatches, the unexplained vendor expenses, the warehouse inventory shrinkage. "Someone's been manipulating the numbers," he said bluntly. "If it's an accident, we have to show how it happened. If it's intentional, Margaret, you have to be ready for the fallout." Lisa broke down in tears when she realized how many signatures, supposedly hers, appeared on invoices she never saw. Alan grew sullen and silent, staring at the table. Margaret, though her heart ached for her children, remained focused. She called a meeting with senior staff and trusted managers. "If anyone has seen anything unusual, missing product, unexplained expenses, changes in routine, now is the time to speak up. The business and your jobs are at stake." Slowly, accounts emerged, delivery men signing out products without paperwork, cash payments for rush orders that vanished, even a rumor that someone close to Alan was taking inventory off-site. Margaret wrote everything down, her ledger growing by the hour. She felt a swirl of anger and sadness, at Alan, at Lisa, at herself for stepping back too soon. But now, she was back at the helm, determined not to let her family's legacy crumble. As dusk fell, the pile of evidence was staggering. Harold looked over the table, then at Margaret. "You have to be the one to go to the IRS first. Voluntary disclosure will give you some leverage. If they find it before you show them, there could be criminal charges." Margaret nodded, knowing what must be done. She gathered the files, flash drive, and ledgers, locking them in her old steel safe. That night, she drafted a letter to the IRS, admitting they discovered errors and requesting a meeting to cooperate fully. Exhausted, she sat alone in the dark kitchen, a single lamp casting her shadow long across the floor. The mistakes of the past few years lay bare, but Margaret had finally taken control. For the first time in months, she felt a strange hope. If she could save the business, she could save her family. The real reckoning, she knew, had just begun. As Margaret mailed the letter to the IRS the next morning, her hands trembled, but her heart was resolute. She'd spent the night replaying every step that brought them here, both the mistakes and the moments of courage. Now, she had to trust that coming forward, armed with evidence and honesty, was their best chance. The Rowan Hardware staff felt the tension in the air. Senior managers gathered in hushed corners, clerks moved with forced cheer, and the warehouse was quieter than ever. Rumors swirled. Some thought Alan was to blame, others whispered about outside sabotage. Margaret moved through each department, meeting employees' eyes, reassuring them with her steady presence. "We're going through a rough patch," she told them, "but I won't let this company fold without a fight. If you see something, say something, there are jobs and families at stake." Alan, meanwhile, was a storm barely contained. He stopped coming into the office, fielding calls from his car and rarely answering Margaret's texts. Lisa returned, pale and penitent, helping Margaret and Harold untangle more financial knots. She combed through digital records, making spreadsheets and timelines, and spent late nights learning more about business management than she ever had before. For the first time, mother and daughter worked as a team, united by necessity and guilt. The IRS didn't take long to respond. Within a week, 2 agents arrived at the Rowan office. They were polite, but direct, middle-aged, briefcase-toting, with clipped voices and expressions that never wavered. Margaret led them to the conference room, offering every file, ledger, and receipt they requested. Alan was absent. He claimed to be on a sales call, and Lisa, sweating bullets, did her best to answer questions. The interview was relentless. The agents probed into every discrepancy: the phantom vendors, the delivery logs, the mismatched payroll. They interviewed staff, reviewed inventory, and asked for explanations Margaret often had to admit she didn't have. Lisa broke down twice, apologizing for her lack of oversight. Margaret never wavered, calmly outlining each step she had taken since discovering the problems. By the end of the second day, the agents had a mountain of evidence and a list of follow-up demands. "You'll be hearing from us within 2 weeks," one said crisply. "If we find intentional fraud, there will be consequences. But your cooperation counts in your favor." After they left, Lisa slumped in her chair, head in hands. What if they shut us down? What if it's criminal? Margaret squeezed her hand. "We can't control what the IRS decides. But we told the truth. That's more than Alan was willing to do." The next evening, Alan burst into the house, red-eyed and furious. "How could you go to the IRS without me? You made me look guilty. Now they're going through my accounts." Margaret stood her ground. "You made yourself look guilty, Alan. If you'd been honest with us, we wouldn't be here." Alan's anger gave way to something almost like fear. He confessed that he'd signed off on some questionable payments just to keep cash flow moving, and admitted he'd allowed a friend to borrow warehouse stock to cover debts, promising to replace it. "It got out of hand, Mom. I didn't think it would come to this." For the first time, Lisa lashed out at her brother. "You risked everything, our name, our family, the business, for shortcuts." "I can't believe you, Alan." Margaret, her heart heavy, saw her children's faces, shamed, desperate, and young again, like the squabbling kids they'd once been. She gathered herself. "We have to focus on what matters, saving this business and protecting our employees. From now on, there are no secrets." They set to work with a new resolve. Margaret took control of all accounts and signed every outgoing check herself. Lisa became the staff liaison, addressing rumors and building trust with longtime employees. Alan, humbled, was tasked with inventory and deliveries. No more friends, no more shortcuts, every item accounted for. As days blurred into nights, the Rowan family learned the cost of ignoring warning signs and the power of facing the truth together. Margaret led them through every stormy day, holding hope for the company, for her children, and for the family name she'd fought so hard to defend. But as the IRS's decision loomed, Margaret knew the future still balanced on a knife's edge. Every morning, she opened the store early, welcoming customers with a steady smile, praying for a second chance. The next weeks crawled by, filled with anxiety and restless waiting. The Rowan family braced for every mail delivery, every unknown number flashing on the office phone. Margaret continued her tireless routine, opening the flagship store each morning, spending her days in the back office reviewing every invoice, every delivery slip, every bank statement. Her presence was both a comfort and a warning, a reminder that the days of easy shortcuts were over. Lisa, humbled and hungry to prove herself, took the initiative to meet with longtime staff. She listened to their frustrations and ideas, apologizing openly for past mistakes. She held meetings to clarify everyone's role, re-established the chain of command, and instituted new protocols for inventory tracking. At her mother's suggestion, she introduced a staff feedback box, encouraging workers to report irregularities without fear. For the first time in years, the warehouse hummed with a sense of order and pride. Alan's transformation was slower and less graceful. Still smarting from Margaret's confrontation and the IRS's scrutiny, he struggled with shame and resentment. At first, he grumbled about his demotion, but as he spent days in the warehouse, learning every inch of the operation from the ground up, he began to see the damage his negligence had wrought. The senior delivery driver, a gruff old-timer named Bill, didn't mince words. "You nearly cost us our jobs, Alan. But you've got 2 hands. Get to work." Alan did, sorting boxes, loading trucks, checking shipments, and slowly earning back the trust of the team. Margaret found herself at the center of this uneasy reconciliation. She set aside her bitterness, inviting her children to weekly dinners where business was discussed openly. No more secrets, no more shouting. She shared stories from her father's days, lessons about honesty, community, and what it meant to carry a family name. The old ledger remained on her desk, both a record of pain and a blueprint for recovery. Ruth, Margaret's lifelong friend and an early investor in the store, became their cheerleader. She reminded everyone, family, staff, even the customers, that Rowan Hardware had weathered storms before. Her faith in Margaret was unwavering, and her presence boosted morale. "People make mistakes," she declared one busy Saturday, handing out cookies to waiting customers, "but the Rowan family knows how to fix what's broken." News of the IRS audit leaked into the community, sparking gossip and concern. Margaret didn't hide from it. She called a town hall meeting at the community center and explained, without flinching, that mistakes had been made but the family was cooperating fully to set things right. She answered every question from customers and local business owners, vowing to maintain the standards that had defined the Rowan name for generations. The town responded with unexpected loyalty. Customers kept coming. Longtime suppliers extended credit and even offered discounts. The show of support moved Margaret deeply. She knew trust could not be bought, only rebuilt, day by day. Then, at last, the IRS letter arrived, a thick envelope, official and foreboding. Margaret gathered Alan, Lisa, and Harold at the kitchen table, her hands steady as she broke the seal. The letter detailed the findings, evidence of negligence, improper accounting, and several unreported transactions, but, thanks to Margaret's swift cooperation and transparency, no criminal charges. Instead, the company faced heavy fines, a 2-year probationary period with quarterly audits, and mandatory business training for Alan and Lisa. Alan let out a sigh, half relief, half regret. It could have been so much worse. Lisa wept openly, hugging her mother. "Thank you, Mom. You saved us, all of us." Margaret felt the weight of the past month's lift, replaced by cautious optimism. The business would survive. Her children had learned the hardest of lessons. The Rowan name, though battered, remained. But Margaret knew the real work was only beginning. To rebuild fully, they would need not just new rules, but a new spirit, one rooted in trust, humility, and the quiet power of listening to those who see what others ignore. As she closed the shop that night, Margaret turned the key and looked back at the golden glow of the lights within. There was still much to be done, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. With the IRS verdict delivered and the threat of closure finally passed, Margaret wasted no time setting her family and business on a new course. The Rowan Hardware stores underwent a transformation, not in products or branding, but in spirit and operations. Margaret began each day before sunrise, walking the aisles with a clipboard and a smile, greeting every worker by name. She led early morning meetings where even the quietest employees were invited to speak. Ideas for improvement poured in, reorganizing the stockroom, updating the outdated point-of-sale system, and even creating an employee-run social media page to highlight community projects. Margaret encouraged it all, knowing the store's future now depended on everyone's buy-in. Lisa threw herself into mandatory business training, eager to prove she could be more than a marketer. She took online courses in accounting and logistics, shadowed Harold in bookkeeping, and worked side by side with the sales staff, learning how to resolve customer complaints with patience and empathy. She started a monthly town hall for staff, where successes and mistakes were discussed openly, sometimes painfully, but always honestly. Under Lisa's watch, morale improved and staff turnover finally slowed. Alan's path to redemption was rougher. Quarterly audits meant no corner could be cut, no shortcut taken. He met with Harold weekly, reviewing every line item, learning where the cracks had formed. The weight of his errors hung heavy, but slowly, Alan changed. He asked for advice, admitted when he didn't understand something, and even apologized to Bill, the senior driver, for the months of chaos. Bill nodded, gruffly satisfied. Everyone gets a second chance, if they earn it. Outside, the community responded in kind. When a spring storm damaged the roof of the flagship store, customers and suppliers pitched in for repairs. The local bakery sent free pastries to the work crew, and a neighbor organized a fundraiser. Margaret was overwhelmed by the show of support, a sign that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt with enough effort and humility. The IRS audits continued, each one a nerve-wracking ordeal. Margaret kept detailed records, answered every inquiry honestly, and made sure Alan and Lisa attended every meeting with the agents. Over time, the IRS inspectors became less severe, nodding at improvements and even offering advice. "You're doing it right now," one agent admitted after the third audit. "Just don't stop." Ruth remained a steady presence, baking cookies and organizing potlucks for the staff, always reminding the Rowans, "Your father would be proud. You faced the truth and made it right." Margaret clung to those words on hard days, letting them fuel her resolve. Slowly, the stores began to thrive again. Sales picked up, staff turnover dropped, and customers left glowing reviews online. Lisa launched a History of Rowan Hardware blog, sharing stories from Margaret's youth and the store's earliest days. The posts attracted attention from the local paper, which ran a feature on the Rowan family's comeback, further boosting business and morale. Through it all, Margaret maintained her careful ledger, not out of mistrust, but as a reminder: never ignore small problems, never silence the voice that warns of trouble, and never underestimate the strength of a family willing to confront its flaws together. As spring turned to summer, Margaret realized the business wasn't just surviving, it was becoming something new. Alan and Lisa were no longer children shadowed by their mother, but partners who'd been tempered by hardship. The staff trusted management again. And Margaret herself felt lighter, no longer carrying the burden alone. But the greatest transformation was in her family. Dinners were no longer tense. Laughter came easier. Secrets had been replaced by shared responsibility. The Rowan name, though once almost lost, had been reclaimed, not just in the eyes of the town, but in the hearts of its own. Still, Margaret knew vigilance was eternal. She taught Alan and Lisa everything her father had taught her: honor, humility, and never turning a blind eye to danger. The story of Rowan Hardware was still being written, but this time the whole family held the pen. Summer brought a new energy to Rowan Hardware. The stores buzzed not just with business, but with a renewed sense of camaraderie. Margaret found herself smiling more often, pausing to chat with employees and customers, her worries replaced by a quiet pride. The ordeal had aged her, yes, but it had also sharpened her resolve to leave a legacy not of struggle, but of resilience and wisdom. Lisa took on more responsibility, earning the respect of the senior staff. She started mentoring new hires, teaching them about the store's history and what it meant to carry the Rowan name. Her knack for marketing transformed into a genuine talent for leadership. She even launched a Rowan Community Day, a weekend of free workshops, product demos, and children's activities that drew families from all over town. The event was a huge success, cementing the store's place at the heart of the community. Alan's growth was visible to all. Humbled by his mistakes, he became a fierce advocate for integrity and transparency. He created checklists, trained the delivery team himself, and sat in on every audit, never shying from tough questions. When a new hire was caught trying to slip merchandise out the back, Alan handled it with compassion but firmness, explaining, "We almost lost everything because we didn't pay attention. That won't happen again." Margaret watched her children work together and saw, for the first time in years, the partnership she had always dreamed of. She shared her old ledgers with them, yellowed pages filled with notes in her father's handwriting, stories about customers, and little warnings: never sign what you haven't read. Never trust what you can't prove. Lisa and Alan pored over them, realizing that every entry was a lesson and every story a warning. The IRS quarterly audits slowly became routine rather than dreaded. Each visit ended with a handshake and a word of encouragement: "Keep up the good work." Even Harold, the ever-cautious accountant, relaxed a bit, praising Alan and Lisa's new vigilance. "You're not just fixing the books, you're fixing the culture," he told them. "That's what will keep this place alive." Community ties deepened. The staff began to feel like family again. Customers lingered, sharing memories of old Mr. Rowan or offering advice about new products. Rowan Hardware became more than a store. It became a symbol of overcoming hardship through honesty and unity. Margaret began thinking of the future. She drafted a new succession plan, this time involving both Lisa and Alan, as well as a small board of trusted employees. "This business will outlast all of us if we do it right," she told her children. But only if you keep listening, especially when it's uncomfortable. One golden afternoon, as the store bustled with activity and laughter rang out from the garden tools aisle, Margaret paused to take it all in. She realized that the ordeal with the IRS, painful as it had been, had become a crucible, forging a new family bond and a stronger business. As the day drew to a close, Margaret found Lisa and Alan in the office. She handed them her father's original ledger, now tattered but full of wisdom. "Promise me you'll never ignore these lessons," she said softly. Lisa squeezed her mother's hand. "We won't. Not ever again." Alan nodded, tears in his eyes. "You saved all of us, Mom." Margaret hugged her children, feeling the weight of the past lift for good. She had passed down not just a business, but a legacy of honesty, vigilance, and hope. And as dusk settled over Rowan Hardware, the lights shining bright against the coming night, Margaret knew the family, and the store, were finally ready for whatever the future would bring. As autumn painted the town in gold and crimson, Rowan Hardware marked its 50-year anniversary. The store was bustling with customers, neighbors, and longtime friends who had gathered to celebrate not only a business milestone, but a story of survival and transformation. Margaret, now officially retired but still ever present, stood at the entrance greeting old friends, her eyes shining with gratitude. The anniversary celebration was a town-wide event. Lisa organized a display of artifacts from the store's history: her grandfather's old cash register, Margaret's first ledger, and newspaper clippings about the grand opening decades ago. Alan led tours of the warehouse, explaining how new systems kept everything running smoothly, and sharing stories, sometimes with a wry grin, about the year the IRS came calling. A stage was set up in the parking lot. Customers and employees gave short speeches, sharing memories of how the Rowans had helped during hard winters, or how Margaret once delivered hardware herself during a blizzard. Ruth, radiant as ever, presented Margaret with a handmade plaque, "For honesty, perseverance, and the heart of Rowan Hardware." During her speech, Margaret's voice rang clear: this business was built on trust. Not just between us and our customers, but between family and friends, workers and community. We faced our mistakes, we learned, and we changed. The Rowan name is strong not because we never faltered, but because we stood together when it mattered most. The crowd cheered, and for the first time in years, Margaret let herself feel truly at peace. In the weeks that followed, Margaret embraced her new role as mentor and matriarch. She met regularly with Lisa, Alan, and the board of employees, helping plan new projects and encouraging innovation. Lisa and Alan, older and wiser, now led with humility and honesty. Quarterly audits became a point of pride, not fear, evidence of how far they had come. The staff grew closer, too. They held monthly breakfasts and celebrated birthdays together. New hires were told, on their first day, "If you ever see something that doesn't look right, speak up." That's the Rowan way. Margaret's legacy was everywhere: in the care with which the floors were swept, in the way employees looked out for one another, in the laughter that filled the store on busy Saturdays. She found herself reflecting often on the journey, from being ignored and dismissed, to fighting for the business's very survival, to witnessing its rebirth. One crisp evening, as she locked the store's front door and looked out at the glowing sign, "Rowan Hardware," Margaret smiled. She had feared that her warnings would be her last act, a note of caution ignored by the next generation. But now, she saw her true gift: the courage to face hard truths, the strength to unite her family, and the wisdom to know when to lead and when to let go. The store would go on, stronger for the trials it had faced, ready for whatever storms might come. And as Margaret walked home, autumn leaves swirling at her feet, she knew that the Rowan story was far from over. It was being written anew every day, with honesty, hope, and the enduring love of family.